All right, we got a natural hush, so we will go ahead and get started. I think we've got our tech mostly worked out, so we are so happy to have you here for this panel this afternoon. I am going to be your moderator for this conversation. My name is Jenny Kaplan. I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati, who I'm currently working on a book about Jews in DC and Marvel, but a couple of years ago I published an article that was specifically on the way that a handful of Jewish characters had gotten essentially retconned into being Jewish. So when Miriam was thinking about the panels for this event, the better part of a year ago, and she had this idea about doing a panel on retcons, she asked if I would want to moderate it, and I'm not sure I've ever smashed the word yes on my keyboard quite as emphatically as I did that day. So I'm so pleased to be able to have this conversation, and I'm so thrilled with the 4 panelists that we have for you. So I'm going to introduce them, and let me just tell you a little bit about the panel, how the panel is going to run. We have exactly an hour, and they will come and chase us out, although you will have a little time afterwards to be able to ask some additional questions if we don't get to everybody. But the plan is that we will talk for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will have a good, hopefully 20 to 30 minutes for audience questions. We have a microphone down front, so when we get to that point, if you just want to line up at the microphone, that way everybody can hear you. If you want to ask a question and you have mobility impairment, just wave your hands, and we have helpful tech folks who will bring a mic to you. So we are hopeful we can get to everybody. So let me introduce our esteemed panel to you, many of whom need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I will start with Brian Michael Bendis, who is on the screen, graciously joining us via the power of Zoom, and we're very happy they've gotten the tech to allow us to do this. So Brian Michael Bendis was born October 18th, 1967. He gave me the most detailed biography, yeah. So I'm very excited about that. So we can all wish him a happy birthday next October 18th. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, to a Jewish American family. He grew up in University Heights, where despite rebelling against a religious upbringing, he attended the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland, a private modern Orthodox religious school for boys. He decided he wanted to be a comic book industry professional when he was 13, working on his own comics, including a Punisher versus Captain America story that he has revised several times. A fan of Marvel Comics in particular, he emulated idols such as George Perez, John Romita Sr., John Romita Jr., Jack Kirby, and Klaus Janson. He later discovered crime comics by Jim Steranko and Jose Munoz, which he traced back via Jim Thompson's work to the source novels of both Thompson and Dashiell Hammett, which helped cement his love for crime stories. These, in turn, led him to discover the documentary Visions of Light, which taught him the explicit visual rules of film noir, an important influence on him creatively. So thank you, Brian Michael Bendis, for joining us.
Thank you.
Next to me then is our other Brian this afternoon, Brian Azzarello. Brian Azzarello is an award-winning American comic book writer and screenwriter who first came to prominence with the hard-boiled crime series 100 Bullets, which, side note, is one of my absolute favorite series, and if you're not familiar with it, you should read it start to finish. It is brilliant. Published by DC Comics' mature audience imprint Vertigo. Brian has worked on titles such as Batman, Superman, Joker, Hulk, and more. Then next down the table, we have Joshua Skye. Originally from Maui, Hawaii, Joshua Skye is currently a writer for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe and heavy metal illustrator. He has written for Marvel Entertainment, Humanoids, Sci-Futures, Tor.com, SFWA, Assemble Media, Tales Interactive, Sunman, Mattel, and Cartoon Network's Ben 10. Woo! Further, Joshua has worked as a copywriter on film and theatrical campaigns such as Steven Spielberg's The Post, Deadpool 2, The Predator, Birds of Prey, and Love, Death, and Robots. Most recently, he published his creator-owned book, Other Worlds, with forthcoming projects on the horizon. And then at the other end of the table, we have the unbelievable Barbara Slate.
Unbelievable.
Oh, I mean, that's not even the last adjective to come out of this bio. Barbara Slate has created characters for DC Comics and Marvel, Described as titanically talented by the legendary Stan Lee, Ms. Slate has written over 300 comics. For Marvel, she created, wrote, and drew Yuppies from Hell and Sweet 16, yay, wrote Barbie fashion comics, and put her own spin on Disney's Beauty and the Beast and Pocahontas. For DC Comics, she created Angel Love, an adult-themed series for tweens and teens, and wrote over 100 Betty and Veronica stories for Archie Comics. Her most recent work is Mirror Test, the Cassidy Hutchinson story. Ms. Slate has been praised as emphatically of our time by the New York Times. She teaches in universities, schools, and libraries using her critically acclaimed textbook, You Can Do a Graphic Novel. So, thank you. We welcome all of our panelists now. And I want to start the conversation a little bit broadly. And let me just say, because before the panel started, a couple of people asked me to define the terms in the title of our panel, which is Canons Are Made to Blow Up, Retconning, Rebooting, Jossing, and Other Paradigm Shifts. And I will say personally, it's one of my favorite titles I've ever written. But to say a little bit, these are all ways of inserting new ideas into the continuity of an ongoing story. So very briefly, a retcon, which is a neologism that comes from return continuity, the return of continuity, is your basic, a certain thing was true at one point in a storyline, and now we have inserted something else, and a new fact is true. So a character who originally had been born in Brooklyn, we have now rewritten the story, and he was born in Boise. For whatever reason. That is your basic retcon. A reboot is perhaps the more familiar of these terms. This is when a title or a piece of media has gone away and come back. And that
moves back to Brooklyn.
Yeah, exactly. The Boise line didn't work for some reason. And so now after a few years, they have decided to bring it back, but now he's from Brooklyn again, except that this time he's a werewolf. And then Jossing is probably the least well-known of the three terms. This comes from Joss Whedon, who has a reputation for not always being particularly polite to his fans. And he perfected perhaps the art of creating storylines in media specifically to shoot down fan theories. So as a way of telling his fans, you are very wrong about what you thought. And so the panel today, we probably won't talk too much about that because this is a panel that is about joy and loving things, and that's not what Joss tends to be about. But I wanted to give that a little gloss for people who were unfamiliar with the terminology. So I want to start with a general question for all four of our panelists about the balance between having a sense of sort of canon continuity. When you have a long-running series, for example, there are things about it that fans love and reasons that they have stuck with it and things about it with which they identify or they like. But at the same time, new writers come on, new artists come on, and they need to have the freedom to write the stories that they want to write, and they need to have the ability to change things. On an earlier panel today, some of you may have been at, E. Lockhart talked about the fact that when she sat down to write Whistle, she was given carte blanche to change the backstory for the Riddler, Edward Nygma. And so that's my opening question to you four is how do you sort of balance what fan expectations are and how you deal with a long-running series, but also the needs of artists to be able to make things their own and make changes that suit their vision. And anyone who wants to start can go ahead and start.
I want to thank you for telling me now what this panel's about. I looked up all the words and I was trying to put them together, and so now I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead. Who wants to start?
Well, can I be heard? Am I heard?
Yes,
There you are.
yes, we can hear you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very, very sorry I cannot be with you in person. I hope the parents in the room understand I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So thank you for making the opportunity for me to join you, because the pull to be at this event was huge. So thank you very much. I will say I deeply enjoy what goes into a retcon, and I think I've learned over many years, it's basically, if you follow like the tenets of improv with your retcons, you're in a good place. And that is like, if it's a yes and, if it's a retcon that's additive, not taking away something that people love, like, if you took away Spider-Man's web shooters, that would bum people out. That's not a fun retcon. That's just, you just took something away that people liked. But if you added something cool to them, right, that's a fun thing. So, the other parts of improv is like to heighten and to elevate ideas. So a lot of times the most successful retcons are if it's additive to the character in a way that brings a lot more emotional truth to their space, or just to how they're running the world. And for us who are making mainstream superhero comics someplace that took an version of the real world like New York, it was always about evolving the space the characters are in to more reflect the world around them. And Peter Parker's been walking around since the high flying 60s, the groovy end of the 60s. He was the disco wearing, he went to the disco with Mary Jane in many issues of Marvel Team Up. And so he just evolves with the time. But as long as the emotional truth of the core character is there, you're pretty good.
Well, I could talk about Betty and Veronica.
Yes, please.
Doing these iconic characters. If you look closely, these girls look exactly alike, except one has blonde hair and the other one has black hair. So you know that men were the creators of these characters. And the love triangle between Betty and Veronica and Archie, I never understood. I couldn't understand why these two beautiful girls were so in love with Archie. And I spoke to Victor Gorelick, who was my editor at the time. He loved Archie. And when I asked him that question, he was taken aback. Oh, he's so wonderful, Archie says. And I really went along with it, but I changed I didn't want the triangle to be of these two girls who have been best friends for 80 years, best friends, fighting over the same guy. So I really wrote mostly about the friendship between the two girls. And that was really a big change for me, and it opened up my view of doing these wonderful characters. And then one day, I've been living with the same man for 34 years, bravo, and one day he was coming in, because I couldn't get Archie. One day he was coming in to our living room with champagne, and the way he was walking and kind of trying to be debonair, I got Archie. I finally got Archie. And I was able to write Archie and love Archie. So that was I'm not sure what the word is, but that's what it was.
And on behalf of the fandom, I should thank you. I've seen people say that the first time that the Archie comics successfully passed the Bechdel test were after you took over writing and you could give Betty and Veronica conversations that weren't just about boys. They could actually talk about other things.
Yes,
so.
and the difference between the two girls, the fact that they remain best friends for 80 years has a lot to do with fantasy, I guess, because they're so opposite. But you do come across, I remember I had this close girlfriend who was so Veronica. And whenever I wrote Veronica, I just climbed right into her head and I could get into her narcissism. And I told her that, that she was my inspiration. And she goes, oh yes, I'm so much like Betty. had no idea that she was Veronica. So.
Joshua, Brian, do either of you want to weigh in on this?
I think if you approach a retcon knowing that you're going to be retconned, it makes things a lot easier. Because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
None of this stuff lasts forever. And there will be blowbacks. I mean, at least every time I've done it, there's been some blowback. But that's fun to me. I mean, to get fans like all screaming, that's a good time. I mean, the worst retcon is when they just get crickets.
They don't notice.
Yeah.
Well, first off, guys, I want to say it's a real honor to be here with all of you guys. And I just had a quick anecdote. I used to intern at Marvel Comics, and at like my first New York Comic Con, I went up to Brian Michael Bendis' table, and I was like, I asked him for advice on like how to break into comic book writing, and here we are today, equals. Just kidding. I look up to all of you guys on this panel. I just want to say that. So no, I agree with everybody's advice. I've never looked at fan warfare as fun though. That's a very interesting take. I think that's a really interesting take. I get scared sometimes of some of the messages.
That's why I do this.
Yeah. But the history of comics and science fiction is a history of fandom and like warfare. There's a really interesting book called The Immortal Storm. And a lot of the history of comics was born out of pulps, just like science fiction. And Immortal Storm is about the first science fiction and like comic book fan groups and about the wars that they had. So it's a very like over dramatic title. It was written by this guy named Sam Moskowitz, who's like a nerdy historian, of course. But for me, retconning, like I agree with all the advice that you guys are giving. What I'm really concerned about, like, is just I try to read as much material as I can and then just try to make whatever I'm writing true to the spirit of the thing and try to, again, like add to it and things that I think would be interesting for people and hopefully not piss too many people off. But I don't know. Now I'm like, maybe I should piss everyone off. Maybe I should.
No. Don't piss everyone off. The sweet spot's 50%.
Right.
You can get 50%
Okay,
loving it,
that's good
50% hating it.
Okay.
That's perfect.
All right, cool.
Well, and that does bring up a question about the process, more on the actual nitty-gritty day-to-day creator side, because I know a lot of people here at the con are creators themselves, are aspiring creators. So when you're faced with a situation, you are coming into a title with existing characters that are not your own. Do you prefer to head straight for your 50% and just like detonate a bomb into the middle of the existing continuity and give yourself a clean slate, or do you try to introduce incremental changes as a writer, as a creator? How do you prefer to actually affect those changes?
I don't know. I mean, it works both ways, I guess. It really depends on the project. Whether, you go in and just like, throw a bomb in, or you hide the bomb and then you let the bomb go off on its own a few issues down.
Secret bomb.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think, especially when you're working on the company-owned characters. I mean, has anybody ever retconned one of their creator-owned? Has anything lasted that long? Like, has Larson retconned Savage Dragon yet? I mean, he's still doing that, right? That's a lot of issues.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've got to treat them with respect, and because they've lasted so long for a reason,
Right.
And one of the things I look at when I'm doing that is like, I don't want to do something that somebody else has already done because it already exists, and then I would have no reason to do it. So it's like, what can I bring to make this a little bit different? I look at these things kind of like it's a diamond. There's a lot of facets. You just try and focus in on one of the facets that hasn't really been.
Well, it was hard to offend anybody doing Barbie.
You would think that before
But
the
I
movie
tried.
came out.
Yeah.
But what happened when Tom DeFalco started the girls line at Marvel, he brilliantly hired Hildy Mesnick, the editor, and she was, we all were, it was a comic that all women were doing, which was very unusual in the 90s, that we had writers and artists, and everybody was Barbie, and we made Barbie a feminist, and that's why I really slept through the movie, because I knew Barbie was fabulous. I knew that she could do anything and be anything and live anywhere. And so that change in Barbie was so wonderful for little girls, and we got so much fan mail. We had such pride in that, in doing that. But the character that bugged me the most was Ken, because all he would do was come and say, "Here, Barbie, here are some flowers." And here was this fabulous girl who could do anything and be anywhere, and she had this ridiculous boyfriend. And so I made Ken a wonderful business traveling, going all over the world, calling Barbie. He was in Europe, he was doing wonderful, making lots and lots of money, a billionaire. And so I was very glad to trade Ken in from that wimpy guy to a successful businessman.
And
And I
to
think
answer,
Barbie was happy too.
I'm sure
Yeah,
she was
Bri-
happy to have him out of town more often.
I was interested in what Brian said about how first of all, it's true, the best retcons get the most ire, but I've never gone looking for that ire. It's always about, I really think I have a great idea that's gonna really make people really interested in something, and then you're always surprised when someone gets angry. It's a very confusing experience. It's never what you're going for, but then you realize part of that emotional reaction is part of the success of it. It's a very strange way. And to the point where once I went online, I said to some people who were like yelling at me about something they kept buying, like, why do you keep buying this? Can I ask you this without sounding like a jerk? I'm dying to know, like, why are you still buying this if I'm annoying you? And they very politely told me, "You're not a sports fan, are you, Brian?" And I go, "No." They go, we're Yankees fans. Like, we're here no matter what. Like, we're howling and yelling about everything." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, I can play that." Like, it really did help me. I really did go, "I understand the game now. Let's have fun." And so I went about telling the best truth I can and bringing the bold ideas, knowing that's what the job is, and knowing that some people are just gonna always look at it like that's not the Spider-Man I grew up with and shake their fist at me. And if some people are doing that, I guess I'm okay. That's what I learned. It's a very strange thing, especially when you're literally trying to make everyone happy. So
Yeah, Joshua, when you came into He-Man, what was your sort of approach to how to tread?
My approach was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they gave this to me. I really don't want to screw this up and keep writing this. When I just really tried to do my homework. I read and watched as much He-Man as I could, and then there were certain, of course, like, it's a toy-focused property, but there's also a lot of really great He-Man stories and some ones that haven't aged well, and I just, kind of like all of you guys, I wanted to tell stories that I thought were interesting, but also true to this character. I don't think I went in being like, I'm going to change everything up, but I noticed that as you go, you think, oh, this would make a logical change, and I think this would be really interesting. The challenge with He-Man is that there's so many territories with their own take on He-Man because it was licensed to multiple territories at once, and Mattel was like, yeah, make up your own stories, kid. So like Germany has all these audio plays of He-Man, and they have their own mythology of He-Man, and it's really hard to study because it's all in German. So like, I went to Germany, they're like, you changed this and you did this, and I'm like, I didn't even understand you guys had this, So that was really interesting. But I guess like for me, I just tried to do my homework, and I tried to just try to tell a great story, and there are changes that come up, and I write them and I turn them in, and really a compass. Something that's really helped me was another He-Man writer I know named Tim Seeley is a really great guy, and he's been a fan forever, and he told me like the compass for him has been, we're here to like make toys, not break toys, right? We're not here to like come in and like make this only for us. We're really trying to give something more to the fans, and I've kind of tried to make that a guiding North Star for myself too.
No, that's a great approach. So to change tacks a little bit, the theme of the event, this whole experience that the Center for Jewish History has put on for us here is about the Jewish comics experience. So I wanted to sort of bring in that element a little bit, and related to what I mentioned at the beginning of the panel. Interestingly, we've heard a lot over the course of the day and the weekend about the Jewish roots of the comic book industry and all of these second generation American Jewish guys who created all of these comic books, and yet they really didn't create Jewish characters. And as we got further into the 60s and 70s, we saw more diversity in comics, and we saw more different types of people in comics, and we still didn't see a lot of Jewish characters. And so it remains that we have a handful of notable Jewish characters now, but they were all sort of retconned into being Jewish. So, Magneto and The Thing and Ragman, and all of these characters that started out created by Jews as non-Jewish characters, and then were all kind of retconned into being Jewish by, interestingly, all non-Jewish writers who took over for them. And so I wanted to sort of throw that out to the panel to ask your thoughts about why that has been the process for a lot of these Jewish characters, that they are folks who have become Jewish after the fact, and it's been a second or third generation of writers who have taken the characters in that direction.
I didn't think that religion really played a big part in most characters, did it? Did you say, oh, this is a Christian or this is a Jew? I think that was really part of the beauty of comics, that who cared? And I don't think Barbie's Jewish. It'd be nice if she were. But it never occurred to me when I did a Bible of a character, to put the religion in.
Although lots of people do think Barbie's Jewish, since Ruth Handler was.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah.
Something to learn.
Another one on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's going out with Ken, who I don't think is Jewish.
The Thing wasn't always Jewish?
He was not. Well, it depends on who you ask, right? I mean,
I'm asking you.
the legend is that Kirby kind of always thought he was, but Stan didn't. And so it wasn't until the Remembrance of Things Past issue a decade or so ago that, he went back to Yancey Street and they finally said that he was Jewish. Yeah, that was recent. And then he had his bar mitzvah. That was great.
Well, I think part of my time at Marvel was, and I didn't do it always consciously, but the characters that were Jewish, like very pronounced Jewish, particularly Kitty Pryde and The Thing, I gravitated to them as star characters. Like in my heart, when I was reading Claremont's X-Men, Kitty Pryde sometimes was the star of the book, was often the supporting character, but I found her just to be a character I loved so much that I wanted to introduce her to other characters, and so her energy became like a big part of my Marvel run, and to the part where and I kept doing it over and over again with a lot of characters, anyone I just felt I could really express the truth with, the way I was raised and who I knew. And to the point where when I was writing Guardians of the Galaxy, I had The Thing and Kitty Pryde and a couple of the Jewish characters all on the team, and someone actually wrote me online and said, wait a second, is this Jews in space? And I'm like, yes, and I'm very proud of that. And so it just gave me an opportunity to create, just from the shared, multiverse of the Marvel comics, I was able to create like an actual Jewish sci-fi yearly run of comics, and that made me very happy. So it just, sometimes these characters were invented by Jewish people, and the coding of what we are as Jews is so clearly involved in the character's DNA that it survives decades of being not the forefront. And then we as Jewish people see it clearly. Oh, we see that truth. I know that. That's my aunt. I understand that completely. And then as we get older and the whole medium evolves and our culture evolves, there's just more places for us to express our individual truths within these characters. So I don't even like some of the creators that didn't make their characters Jewish when we see them as obviously Jewish. I don't even think they were conscious sometimes of it. I just think it's just the reality they lived and who they knew, and it seeped into other characters that sometimes feel Jewish, like Steve Rogers. I know other people don't think so, but it's hard for me as a little Jewish kid not to see him that way. But I understand that other people have see it differently. It's part of what's interesting about some of these characters, that a lot of people see a lot of themselves in them, regardless of us knowing the Jewish background and stuff. And so you want to keep that as part of it as well.
Right. Making the character so much more universal by not even giving them making them a Kryptonian instead of Jewish. You know, like Superman is so obviously Jewish to me in his morals and his like world outlook, but because he didn't have to go out and say he's Jewish, but he's from Krypton, it made everyone really be able to relate to him even more. But I learned something really random and crazy, because like, since we're talking about coding characters with like Jewish morals and stuff, like He-Man, I was having coffee with the guy, Michael Halpern, who wrote the original story Bible for He-Man, when they really didn't know what He-Man was going to be, and Mattel was like trying to wrap their head around that. And he said, yeah, originally He-Man in my story Bible, I really based it off the story of the Maccabees. And I was like, give him like a triple take, and I had to record him saying that, because it was so insane to me that this like Aryan Ubermensch with an iron cross strapped to his chest was like based on the story of the Maccabees. That was really insane to me, but also very cool. But I feel like in certain ways, the coding of Jewish morals and ethics, like while making Jewish characters, I think is important, I wonder, like, has the coding made it much more universal? And if so, like, what's more important? I kind of think about that a lot. Like, is it that this, and I think you can do both, and I think it's important to do both, but I feel like that coding it that way made it much more relatable to so many more people and really got Jewish morals out there in a greater way.
And
you know, it sort of that and it takes me back to what Brian said earlier about, you know, trying to piss off exactly 50% of the people. When Into the Spider-Verse came out a few years ago, there was a lot made online about the fact that in one of the Spider-Verse scenes that we're watching, one of the Peter Parkers is getting married, and he steps on a glass at his wedding. So, you know, okay, we now got undeniable proof that Peter Parker is Jewish. Peter Pan, very Goyish.
That's a red right there.
Peter Parker, on the other hand. So I went to a comic expo in Cincinnati, which again, where I live, last year, and I stopped by the table of a couple of different people who write and draw for Spider-Man, and I was like, you know, so what do you think about this theory that Spider-Man is Jewish and he's always been kind of secretly Jewish? And they universally were like, no, that's not a thing, and Spider-Man's not Jewish. And then earlier today, Frank Miller said Spider-Man is the most Jewish comic book character in the entire canon of comics. So it's always, you're gonna get it. Half the people are going to agree with you, and half the people are going to think you're out of your mind. So I want to start to open it up for.
Can I comment on that?
First, I want to let Brian talk. Yes.
Oh yeah, you brought up something that speaks to the overall here, and that, you know, for the entire time I was writing Spider-Man, it was almost 20 years. I felt that like there's a lot of Jewishness here, and I would make jokes about it online, and I would lean into it sometimes, but. In Danny Fingeroth's book, I don't know if Danny's in the room, but I'll embarrass him. In Danny's book, he makes an amazing observation about how Stan Lee, as a young man at 16, was kind of forced to go to work for his uncle Martin in publishing, where Uncle Martin wasn't so nice to him all the time. And that was a very traumatic part of his life. And then you cut to, oh my God, you mean like Peter Parker, who went to work for an angry publisher? And why was a little kid working in publishing in New York City? Like, because it was Stan. Stan was writing about himself. And we're talking about like writing your truths. He was writing as close to the bone truth as he possibly could as Peter Parker, to, you know, and so many of us related to it, even without knowing, oh, this is him. He's writing, of all the characters, this is the one that's most like him or a part of him. And I just find that very fascinating. And I think that's why, even though the characters of Spider-Man say he's not Jewish, okay, but boy, there's a lot of Jewish energy in that character based on the creators and where they lived and the trauma that they brought to the page.
Yeah, well, they say write what you know, and you know,
Yep.
you'll get the best result out of that. So the closer to you it can be. Did anyone else want to pop in on anything before we? Okay, let's go to Sabra.
Hi, my name is Sasha. I'm a comic book historian, and my job is to dress as obnoxiously Jewish as possible, so I'm here as Sabra today. My question to you is a very fun one. What would you say is your favorite retcon of a character?
Don't look at me.
I'm still struggling with that word, so I'm having a hard time.
Well, I can tell you personally, my favorite retcon was when Magneto was retconned to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor by Chris Claremont, which helped to kind of redefine the character and give him so much depth and nuance, and became one of my favorite characters. So just as a helpful prompt to that.
Can we pick ones that we did? Is that?
Yours or anybody's.
Jessica Jones is a retcon. She didn't exist, and then I had her exist in the entire history of the Marvel Universe, including, and I was saying, how far can I push this retcon? How far would the audience allow this? And I have her walking up to Peter Parker in Amazing Fantasy 15 as he's just about to get bit by the spider. She's just about to tap him on the shoulder to ask him out. And instead he gets bit by the spider. She's right off camera going, and off she goes. So they have a history from high school, and the audience accepted it completely. I literally was like, how much of this will they put up with? And I never got any dinged on that. So people were into it, as long as it was additive, again, to the earlier point. That's what I learned.
I would have to say the change in art of Betty and Veronica through the ages, how different they are today than they were in the 50s and 40s. You know, they just done by, I think the Dan DeCarlo was the one that gave the final look of Betty and Veronica that we use today. So that was a big change for the better, I think.
Since I'm working on like He-Man, when the 2000 X series that they did, which was the story editor was Dean Stefan. I think that from the Filmation series to that series, I feel like that series really uplifted the material in such a mature, interesting, cool way, with so many great stories and a lot of moving stories, and took the material very seriously. So I really enjoyed that take on He-Man.
I really don't like retcons, and I wish people would stop screwing with my childhood.
Fair.
So you're part of that 50%. Over to the side.
Hi, Brian Michael Bendis. Thank you for all of the comics that you've written that have really inspired me. I was actually going to ask you about Jessica Jones as a retcon. I love how Peter Parker, when he meets her in the Avengers, he calls her Coma Girl, because like, oh, you're a Coma Girl. And she's like, what? Because like she was such a big part of his life. But I was wondering for you, like with the Century coming out, you know, in close proximity, did you and Paul Jenkins have like conversations about who was going to be able to do the, you know, the bigger insert into the totality of the Marvel Universe? And is there anything that you still wish that you could insert back further into your character?
First of all, for people who don't know, the Century created by Paul Jenkins is an outstanding retcon idea. And what they did was, the joke was that Stan Lee had invented this character in the birth of the Marvel Universe, and we had all forgotten about him. Like something had happened in the Marvel Universe, and now no one knows he exists. It was a great bit of business. They even had like fake articles in Wizard magazine making it look real and everything. It was fantastic. So because the Century had such a great bit of business around it, I never actually saw them as similar. So, but I so admired the Century's creation. I always looked at something I didn't think I was mad I didn't think of it, and so I never saw them as similar. But no, I must say, looking back, there's always things you wish you could have done better, or wish you would have been maybe a little, you know, just now you know better. But I think I've certainly shoved enough retcons. I mean, whole human beings I shoved into scenes that were not there before. So I think I certainly did enough retconning on my end. I don't feel that pull to do it again. But thank you for all that lovely things you just said. That was very nice.
Hello. This is a very specific question for Brian Michael Bendis. In your Superman run, I think in issue number 13, there's a line from a character, Meander, who's an alien king, and he's talking to a bunch of other aliens. It's on a council, and he says, I had my chief science officer leave his cousin's bar mitzvah to come check some of your readings. And I'm wondering, is this a retcon to bring Judaism to alien cultures? Or is this...
I told you.
I scoured the internet to try to find an answer to this line, which seems very out of nowhere, and I'm really curious to hear where it came from.
Well, if you read my Guardians of the Galaxy, you know there are Jews in space. And if there are Jews in space, then there are bar mitzvahs in space. I think it makes total sense and doesn't need any further examination.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Thank you for that, though. I did, it was, now you're seeing, the real answer is now you're seeing I'm much more aware of my space as a Jewish writer, not just a writer. And I'm very aware I'm standing on the shoulders of great Jewish writers who created the greatest Jewish character of all time. And I wanted to be additive to that idea anywhere I could. So it's a cheeky line, but at the same time, yeah, I'm saying we're here, we're living, we're celebrating.
Hi
there, my name's Ben, and I also have a question for Brian. But I'm sorry, otherwise, but something like how much of a Jewish heritage Peter Parker entwined with. But if you create Miles Morales, a character who is Black and Puerto Rican, and with very different cultural upbringing and lifestyle, and even relationship with his hero dynamic in circle of friends, was there any attempt to add a Jewish infusion to Miles, or is he basically his own thing in the context of character dynamics and retcon productions of characters in different universes?
Well, yeah, no, I never, there wasn't really any space in the story that Miles is telling. There's so much to get to with Miles and his family and his, biracial life that is very rich and full of thing. And we have this opportunity to really, show all of that. So that was the spotlight for Miles. And also, yeah, we have, we had 18 years of Yiddish Peter Parker and Ultimate Spider-Man. So, and with Kitty Pryde. So I had a lot of Judaism in Ultimate Spider-Man before Miles showed up, but I appreciate that.
And what's it been like seeing Miles sort of evolve, especially with it's a mainstream character, especially with the Spider-Verse movies and Insomniac Games? He's more popular now than when you first introduced him. That's kind of incredible.
No, it's a hug that never ends. I run around to tell anyone who will ask me what it feels like, because I now know it's the best feeling that comics can bring you. We were additive to something that we love, and this hug that never stops, which is Miles and the video games and the filmmakers, and not only the warmth that it brings to my life, but the fact that there's 1,000 people on the crew of the Spider-Verse movies, and they're all doing amazing work. And to have Miles be this centerpiece for everyone to do such beautiful work, I don't understand why it's happening. And I just try to be real present with it and really just go, wow, this is what a beautiful thing. I also know that a lot of the creators that we came up admiring didn't get to see this in their lifetime. It happened with their characters. Like Jack didn't get to see this. He wanted it. He talked about it all the time. He wanted to see all his characters in the movies. And the fact that we as creators sometimes get that experience is quite a gift. And I just can't tell you enough. If you want to make comics for a living and create new stuff, and do it, because if it works out, it's unbelievable, as advertised.
Hi, I wanted to jump off something that TV Brian said, but really anybody can answer this. I liked your sports analogy when you were talking about fans being sports fans and they're always there. And I was talking with a bunch of friends of mine, and right now there's kind of a split between fans asking questions but being toxic about it, and creators just shutting down and not wanting to answer any questions about the characters. And my friend invoked a line from Ted Lasso, the owner of the sports team. She says, even though we own these teams, they don't really belong to us. They belong to the fans. And he kind of said the same thing about the characters, Spider-Man and other characters. So I kind of brought up the idea of like a press conference, because if a coach makes a questionable decision, he has to face journalists and the press and answer questions. And there's really no forum for creators to do that in a healthy environment. And a lot of people said, no, these creators don't owe fans anything. And everybody was like, well, like, these people have been reading these stories forever and they want answers to their questions. And there's no balance in between to do that in a respectful manner. So I just wanted to see what you guys thought about it.
Anyone want to jump in on that?
You don't want to know that.
Oh, I assure you we do.
You don't want to know. I think that line from Ted Lasso, that's very romantic. There is not one owner of any sports team on earth that thinks he doesn't own that team or she doesn't own that team. Same with, like, we don't own these characters when we're working on them either. You know, we're in the driver's seat, you know. That's like, you know, Batman is DC's Maserati. I still got to go put that car back in DC's garage, you know. If you and having, you know, a problem with, say, something that the creators are doing, you really need to look beyond us if you have a problem with things. Like, I look beyond us with things. The way things are going right now, I'm not too happy with. So I'm like you, okay?
I think for me, when I'm working on these characters, I worked on Beauty and the Beast, which the characters were just in my head. Cogsworth and Lumiere were fighting, and I was just kind of the muse, just listened to them for years. I got all the dialogue from their voices. So they really become a part of you. Of course, I don't own them, although I did sneak in one character. I sneaked in Bookbinder in the 9th issue of Beauty and the Beast, and I was so nervous thinking that they were going to call me and say, who the hell do you think you are, playing around with our characters? But they didn't. It went right through. But they really become part of, I mean, I think about them night and day, and they're in my dreams. I mean, they're really part of my life. They occupy my when I'm upset, I can't think of anything. I go into my characters, and it's a whole world out there. It's a whole world inside. Sorry, and it's a big escape. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I had to say something.
I feel like aren't panels kind of like that a little bit, where it gives you an opportunity to talk about it? Because it's really true. These characters, like what Brian was saying, some of them are so valuable, and the companies are so protective, and we're just stewards. And even when I've created some He-Man characters, those aren't mine at all. Like, every character I create, that goes straight back into, you know, Mattel's pantheon of characters that they have. And I just feel like there is a certain, like, kind of line you have to toe, at least for me, like, where you have to be kind of careful about what you say sometimes, and you can't fully speak for the company because you don't own any of this stuff, and the companies are very, very, very you know, strong, you know, kind of an iron fist over these characters, and you know, because they have their business reasons.
As they should be. They're making them a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And plus, you guys that come to these shows, I don't know what you do on the internet. I mean, but you're nice here. I mean, I don't think anybody. No, that's not true. I could probably count like on my hands, and I've been doing this for a long time. People that have come up and complained to my face.
Never happened.
But they'll complain.
It precedes the internet too. I was out here all week, you know, and Karen Green is here. I was working in Chris Claremont's papers at Columbia, and boy, the number of angry letters people wrote him in like 1981 that said, do I have children present? They were like, hey, fuckface. So, you know, we have found ways to be hateful to each other long before the internet existed.
But let me ask you, are they things that we now know are famous things Chris did that are like people are beloved ideas now? Because that's often the case with us, is that we're getting yelled at by something that a few years from now might be beloved. And we've all lived with it, seeing other creators do it, and we don't know we have to wait a few years to find out if we're being yelled at for real or being yelled at by internet. You know, it's a strange thing. So when I see some of these letters to Chris or like Kurt Busiek, and they're yelling at them for some change they made that we now know is iconic, like it had to happen. It's the most important thing that happened. But at the time, people were screaming and yelling. And I know, Brian, I'm sure you had the same feeling, like that often would be in my head when I was getting yelled at. I'm like, well, you know, Stan got yelled at. So
Yeah.
it happens.
I'm a bit of a writer myself, and I've kind of got parental feelings towards my characters. So now, Mr. Bendis, Jessica Jones and Morales Spider-Man have been around long enough that other people have worked on them. Do you feel, what's your take on their retcons of your stuff?
I have been very lucky in this regard. I've had some, again, not only the comics, but the films and the games. There's some of the best artists in the world are working on these characters at the moment. So it's a gift that I just get to be part of. And you're right. There's a parental feeling. And when you create something, it does feel like Sarah and I had a baby named Miles Morales, and Miles is basically in college now. Like he's off to college and having his own adventures with his own friends. That's what it feels like. It's very unique.
Hi, my name is Richard. This doesn't have to be a question to any particular person, but I wanted to ask for reflections on really the change in culture vis-a-vis continuity. And you can't have an issue about retcons if you don't have continuity, or nobody cares about continuity. And I'm thinking back, because I'm an old guy, I'm thinking back to the comics that I first encountered in the late 50s and early 60s, where it seemed like every issue of Batman had something else different that happened around the time that his parents were shot. In Superman, let's not even talk about how many rockets got sent off from Krypton at the same time as Kal-El and all the things that were all happening at the same time. And yet at the time, the culture didn't seem to care. There was nobody responding that we know of to all of these things that were happening simultaneously, it seems. So I wonder if any of you want to comment about where we are now in thinking about continuity versus the way things used to be in comics and continuity, and how that wasn't so much of a concern for the creators at that time.
I don't like continuity.
Well, Superman's a perfect example because this character's been through so many eras and so many generations, and there are some wacky Superman stories, like really wacky, not even kryptonite related Superman stories. And when I was doing all my research to walk in, it became clear, oh, it's really about the emotional truth at one point. It's like, as long as it feels emotionally truthful to Superman, I don't have to reference, you know how many times you were turned into a dinosaur? 9 times, Superman. You've been a dinosaur 9 times. So there's no reason to bring that up if you just want to get to the core of the character.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, like, when I was reading comics when I was a kid, the Thing could be off planet in 2 and 1, but he's in New York in Fantastic Four. That never bothered me. It was never like an issue. That would be an issue right now. I don't know when fandom became so like continuity beholden and driven. I don't know.
I think it's a part of audiences also. Like, you know, a lot of these characters, when they first were introduced, there wasn't a loud stage to screw up on, right? But now that some of these characters have been around like 70 plus years and people have a certain expectation, like if you go back to the original Batman, I went back to some of the, he's like carrying a gun and shooting people. I'm like, this is insane. This was so different than how I imagined Batman to be. And then even in He-Man, when I go back to the original issues, He-Man's like a caveman and like, and he's totally different than how we would think. So these things evolve over time, but I think over time they start catching a certain like, okay, this is what the hummus, whatever this property tastes like, and there's an expectation like that. But and I think audiences have gotten, you know, taken these things more seriously in their expectations. But I think a new property today could get away with the same sort of stuff. But when you have something like 70 years old, that's a whole different ballgame. I think even I was listening to Jerry Conway speak, and when he killed off, spoiler, when he killed off Gwen Stacy, like he was like, it was a very loud stage to screw up by then, right, in the 70s. And think about Spider-Man now. you know? I mean, I remember people being mad when some people being mad when Miles Morales was introduced, and now like everybody loves Miles Morales. So I think if they give it a chance and it's true to the spirit of who that character is and it serves the story, I think people give a lot of, eventually, a lot of, you know, leeway.
And I think this is one of those places where the internet has changed things because people just have more of a platform to complain about it. Because this summer I went out to Stan Lee's papers in Wyoming, and you know, there were letters in his files from 1967 where somebody was saying, you know, in Fantastic Four issue number 14, Reed Richards seemed to be left-handed, but in issue number 27, it seems like he's writing with his right hand. And so I really want to know what you meant by changing that. So like, those people were always there. We just didn't see their inner thoughts the way that we do now.
Well, certainly feminism has changed the way Barbie is and the way she looks, which I think is wonderful. But you know, when she didn't start out as a comic, but she started out as a doll with huge breasts and this very tiny waistline, and you know, really something to. I think everybody, little girls, really admired and wanted to have that body, but it's really changed over the years. You know, at Marvel we gave her a boob job, and and she was much more like a regular girl. So that was a big change in that character. Thank God.
We have time for one last question.
My question is more related to the.
Yep, we can hear you.
My question is more related to the business aspect of it. I've spent about half my career in publishing. My question is, when do they take the keys to the Maserati away from you? When do they say, we've decided this retcon isn't working, and what's the criteria that they use to determine that?
Sales.
It's like every 10 years. That's when they take the keys. That seems like to be when retcons happen, like once a decade, right?
Yeah,
And everything gets rebooted, so it's never the same again. Or that's every summer, rather.
and for them, it's simple. It's sales. If you guys buy it, they'll make more. If you don't, they won't. That's it. It's always that.
I used to work at Marvel in licensing and branding, and I remember someone telling me, I was 22 is my first job, and they said, you know, we're talking about why there's so many reboots every 10 years. And I'm like, well, every 10 years is a new generation of 10-year-olds. So those expectations change too. And that's like a big core audience and of buyers as well. So that's a part of it, I think.
And it's always.
I don't know how big that core audience is. I don't see any 10-year-olds out there.
That was the belief in licensing.
We get one more quick last question because you stood there for so long.
Thank you. Okay, it's kind of a general question for everybody. I wanted to ask how you how you talk about your properties with your fellow writers and artists in comics, because there's like continuity is weird to me because there's like so many differences between writers and artists who all have different takes on a character. So like Batman can be super aggressive and violent in one issue, and then in the next issue he's saving children, and it's just weird to me. Like, do you guys talk to each other? Do you ever like go up to each do writers ever go up to each other and be like, yo, your Batman is like super fucking whack? Is there any conversation about how to write a character in a way that makes sense to everybody?
I guess.
Honestly, we talk about it all the time. We talk about this stuff with such deep passion. Everyone I know in comics is all in all the time. It's always. So talking about what Brian was talking about earlier, like if people knew how passionate like your baseline comic creator was, I genuinely think the conversation would be elevated. I don't think any fan would come at someone with that, hey man, what did you do to the, if you knew how we live with them all day long. So we often talk to each other and about each other with a lot of respect, because we know even if that's not my take on Batman, I know it's a passionate personal take, and let it happen. So
all right, let us thank our panelists.
thank you so much.
Everybody go buy their things.
See you, Brian.
Thank you. Have a good one.